Ethan Parker left the cafe with a tight feeling in his chest, the kind that came when hope ended quietly instead of breaking loudly, and as he stepped into the cool Boston evening, the sounds of the city rushed around him like nothing important had happened, which somehow hurt more. Just minutes earlier, he had been sitting across from Claire, a woman he barely knew but had secretly hoped might become something more, and she had looked at him with gentle eyes and told him he was kind, stable, and thoughtful, but not the man she felt a spark with. She said it politely, carefully, as if trying not to bruise something fragile, yet the words still settled deep inside him. Ethan had nodded, smiled back, and wished her well, because that was what a decent man did, even when disappointment pressed hard against his ribs. Now he walked without direction, past shop windows glowing warmly and couples laughing together, and each reflection felt like a reminder that life kept moving forward whether he felt ready or not. At 36, Ethan was tired of introductions, tired of explaining who he was and what he wanted, tired of being almost enough. He wasn't bitter, just quietly worn down, like someone who had carried the same suitcase for too many years. He passed a park near the river and slowed, drawn by the calm water and the soft lights along the path, and decided to sit for a moment, telling himself it was just to rest his feet, though he knew it was really to give his heart time to settle. Sitting there, he replayed the date in his head, not the awkward moments, but the small hopeful ones, the shared laugh, the easy talk about books and travel, the way he had briefly imagined a future that now disappeared. He wondered if there was something invisible about him that people sensed, something that made them turn away even when everything seemed fine on paper. The thought made him feel small, but he pushed it aside, breathing slowly and watching the river flow, reminding himself that rejection didn't mean failure, even if it felt that way. As he stood to leave, deciding it was time to go home and sleep off the disappointment, a voice behind him stopped him, asking softly if he was okay, and the question caught him off guard because no one usually noticed him like that. He turned and saw a woman standing a few steps away, her expression open and sincere, not curious in a nosy way but concerned in a human one. For a moment, Ethan almost said he was fine, the automatic answer he always gave, but something in her tone made him pause, and he realized how rare it was for someone to ask without expecting anything in return. He told her he was okay, mostly, and gave a small smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, and she seemed to understand without pressing him. As they stood there in the quiet park, the noise of the city fading into the background, Ethan didn't know yet that this brief moment, this unexpected interruption after a quiet rejection, was the edge of a turning point, the kind that sneaks up slowly, disguised as nothing special at all. Ethan blinked as the woman settled onto the other end of the park bench, her presence calm and unassuming, yet somehow drawing him out of the spiral of self-pity he had been sinking into, and when she introduced herself as Laura Mitchell, he found himself repeating his name, feeling the unusual warmth of human connection that didn't demand anything from him, just offered a simple acknowledgement that he existed. She explained, casually, that she had been waiting for a friend who was always late, which made Ethan laugh quietly, the sound breaking through the heaviness he had carried from the cafe, and he realized he had not laughed like this in a long time, not without effort or pretending. There was a moment of silence between them, soft and natural, filled only by the gentle ripple of the river and the distant hum of traffic, and Ethan felt something strange and comforting. He could just sit without having to explain himself, without judgment or expectation. Laura's next words surprised him. She asked if he had had a bad date, and Ethan hesitated before nodding, sharing a brief, honest account of the evening, how Claire had been kind yet firm in her rejection, how it stung despite her polite tone, and how he was beginning to feel that perhaps he was destined to be overlooked, no matter how genuine he was. Laura listened, not with pity, but with attention that felt rare and precious, and when she spoke about her own past, her failed marriage, the loneliness afterward, Ethan felt a quiet recognition, a shared understanding that made the air between them feel lighter yet charged with unspoken empathy. She admitted she had stopped believing in timing after her heartbreak, and Ethan nodded, feeling a strange alignment of experiences, the kind that made strangers suddenly feel like companions on a difficult journey. Then, unexpectedly, she asked him a question so bold and disarming that Ethan almost choked on his own surprise. Would you consider being my husband? The words hung in the air, heavy yet gentle, as though she had tossed a lifeline and was waiting to see if he would reach for it. Ethan's mind raced. He had never been asked something like that before, not in jest, not seriously, and certainly not by someone he had just met. His first reaction was disbelief, but as he looked into Laura's eyes, calm, sincere, and unwavering, he felt a strange shift, a sense that this question was not about impulsive romance, but about honesty, courage, and recognition of a rare kind of connection. Laura clarified that she didn't mean immediately, not that night or the next, but that she wanted to know if he could imagine the possibility, a future built on mutual respect and care, a partnership chosen deliberately instead of stumbled upon by chance. Ethan's heart pounded with a mix of fear, excitement, and something he had not felt in years, hope, the kind that made him sit up straighter and consider the question seriously rather than dismissing it. He realized that for the first time in a long time, someone was not just seeing the surface of him, his manners, his job, his polite gestures, but was noticing his quiet resilience, his willingness to show up even after disappointment, his capacity to care deeply even when others had walked away. For the next several minutes, they spoke softly, leaning into the vulnerability of strangers who had recognized something familiar and human in each other. They talked about what marriage meant, not in terms of ceremony or societal expectation, but as a promise of shared life, understanding, and companionship. Ethan shared his fears of commitment, his worries that he might never meet someone who truly understood him, and Laura shared hers, the scars left by loss, the hesitations born of heartbreak, and the cautious hope that life sometimes gives rare chances if one is brave enough to accept them. Each confession, each quiet laugh and small nod of understanding, made the bond between them grow, a fragile yet palpable thread stretching across the space of the bench, connecting two people who had wandered through disappointment and loneliness and suddenly found each other. The river flowed beside them, reflecting the city lights like scattered stars, and Ethan felt time slow, the moment growing heavy with possibility, the kind of possibility that doesn't come often and demands attention when it does. He realized that Laura's question had shifted something inside him. It wasn't just about the words themselves, but about the fact that someone had dared to imagine a shared future with him, and that daring invited him to do the same, to allow himself to hope despite past failures. As they continued to talk, Ethan noticed the small details, the way her eyes softened when she listened, the slight tilt of her head when she considered his words, the calm patience in her tone that allowed him to unfold without pressure. It was as if the world had briefly paused around them, the city noises dimmed, and all that mattered was the quiet honesty exchanged between two people who had survived enough to recognize the rare value of sincerity. By the time Laura finally stood to leave, promising she would not press for an answer that night but hoping he would think about her question, Ethan felt a shift in his chest, a loosening of the heaviness he had carried since the cafe, replaced with a flutter of anticipation, a spark of curiosity, and the tentative beginning of something he had almost stopped believing in. As he watched her walk away, he realized that life had offered him an unexpected gift, disguised as a simple question asked at the right moment, and though the path ahead was uncertain, Ethan felt for the first time in years that maybe, just maybe, he could imagine a future where he was chosen, not just noticed, where hope could exist even after disappointment, and where the quiet moments of connection could grow into something lasting, meaningful, and deeply human. Ethan spent the next days replaying Laura's question over and over in his mind, walking through the streets of Boston with a mix of disbelief and growing excitement, unable to shake the thought that a stranger could so directly ask him to consider a future together, and the more he thought about it, the more he realized how rare it was to meet someone who saw him, really saw him, beyond polite conversation or casual introductions, someone who recognized the quiet strength and honesty he had carried through years of small disappointments and failed hopes. Each time he remembered the look in her eyes, calm, sincere, patient, it made his chest tighten in a way that was thrilling rather than painful, and he found himself imagining the possibilities, not as fantasies but as something tangible, a life built on honesty, understanding, and deliberate choice rather than circumstance or fleeting attraction. When they met again in the same park a few days later, the conversation picked up seamlessly, as though the intervening time had not created distance but had instead built anticipation, and Ethan felt a warmth in being able to speak openly, to share small fears, ambitions, and stories he had never voiced to a casual acquaintance. Laura, in turn, revealed more about herself, The moments after her divorce when she questioned her own judgment, the times she had wondered if she would ever meet someone who could be more than a companion for a fleeting moment, and Ethan listened, absorbing the depth of her honesty, the absence of pretense, and the quiet courage it took to face vulnerability without defensiveness. The bond between them grew quickly, yet naturally. They shared walks through quiet streets, coffee dates that turned into long conversations about family, work, dreams, and even their small everyday joys, and with every exchange, Ethan felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to crumble, not through force or pressure, but through the steady, patient presence of someone who cared enough to listen and enough to ask boldly. He began noticing the small signs of connection, the way Laura laughed at the right moments, her attentive gaze when he spoke, the subtle gestures of consideration, like offering to carry his coat when the wind picked up or suggesting places she knew he would enjoy visiting, and these gestures, simple yet meaningful, showed Ethan that her question had not been whimsical, it had been intentional, a true invitation to explore a life together. One evening, as they shared dinner in a small, cozy restaurant lit by soft amber lights, Ethan found himself reflecting on how strange and wonderful life could be, how a night of rejection could lead to an unexpected encounter that felt so profoundly right, and how the timing of it all, so unpredictable yet perfectly aligned, made him reconsider everything he had believed about missed chances and the slow, quiet work of fate. He remembered the feeling of walking alone through the park, the emptiness that had weighed him down, and contrasted it with the electricity of sitting across from Laura now, feeling seen, appreciated, and quietly cherished, and he realized that the question she had asked was not just about marriage or labels, but about the recognition of potential, about the willingness to take a chance on connection, and that this was far more valuable than any casual encounter he had experienced before. As days turned into weeks, Ethan and Laura's meetings became a rhythm of discovery. Afternoons spent exploring the city, evenings of long, thoughtful conversation, and moments of quiet reflection together by the river, where they shared hopes, fears, and dreams with a kind of intimacy that was both thrilling and grounding, proving to Ethan that relationships built on honesty and mutual respect could unfold quickly without feeling rushed or forced. Each time Laura mentioned the idea of a future together, Ethan's heart raced, not with anxiety, but with the delicate balance of excitement and contemplation, and he began imagining a life where choices were made consciously, not out of habit or obligation, but out of genuine desire to walk side by side with someone who understood him, who could see past his careful exterior and recognize the depth of his heart. Ethan's internal struggle was not about doubt in Laura, but doubt in himself, whether he could embrace such a rare opportunity, whether he could risk hope after so many moments of disappointment, whether he could truly step forward and allow someone to see him fully, unguarded, vulnerable yet strong. And each time he asked himself these questions, Laura's calm, unwavering presence reminded him that courage often came in small, deliberate steps, and that the act of choosing each other mattered more than the destination. One rainy evening, they found themselves sharing a quiet cab ride home, the city lights blurring past the window as Ethan felt a strange mixture of longing and anticipation, and when Laura reached out to touch his hand lightly, it was both a comfort and a thrill, a physical acknowledgement of the trust and connection they had nurtured, and Ethan felt a warmth spread through him, the kind that comes from being chosen and choosing in return. The weeks that followed were a dance of gentle discovery, full of small gestures that carried meaning, and Ethan realized that their relationship was evolving into something rare and significant, a bond built on honesty, shared experience, and a willingness to step into the unknown together, all beginning from the simple yet profound question Laura had asked in the park: would he consider being her husband? With each passing day, Ethan felt more certain that this was not a fleeting encounter or a chance meeting to be forgotten, but a turning point, a moment that would shape the course of his life, and he understood that the courage to answer, the patience to understand, and the willingness to embrace possibility were the foundation for a relationship that could grow deep roots, and that the quiet, steady unfolding of love could sometimes be more powerful and lasting than the grand gestures or dramatic declarations he had always imagined. By the time they parted each evening, there was a sense of anticipation, a promise in their shared glances and soft smiles, a recognition that something important was unfolding, and Ethan walked home with a heart lighter than it had been in years, filled with hope, curiosity, and a cautious, exhilarating joy that life could surprise him, even after disappointment, and that sometimes the right question, asked with sincerity and courage, could open the door to a future worth daring for, a life shared with someone who saw him fully and invited him to see her in the same way. After weeks of quiet discovery and small shared moments, Ethan and Laura reached a point where the tentative curiosity between them began to feel like something tangible, a connection strong enough to be noticed not just by themselves but by the rhythm of their days. And one evening, Laura invited Ethan to her apartment for dinner, a simple meal. Home-cooked, nothing extravagant, just warmth, conversation, and the soft glow of lights. That made the space feel safe and intimate, a perfect backdrop for honesty and reflection. They talked while preparing the food together, laughing at small mistakes, teasing each other gently, and sharing stories that revealed more of who they were than any formal introduction could have, and Ethan felt the tension of weeks of uncertainty melt, replaced by an easy companionship, a sense that he could be himself fully without fear of judgment. After dinner, sitting across from each other at the small table, the conversation shifted from light stories to deeper thoughts, their voices dropping slightly, as though aware that the evening was marking a step beyond casual acquaintance into something more serious, more deliberate. Ethan felt his heart pound with anticipation and a strange nervousness, and he knew that the moment was important, that it carried the weight of possibility that had been building since the night he had first met Laura in the park. He took a deep breath and spoke, choosing his words carefully but honestly. He told her that he had thought about her question every day, that it had stayed with him, sometimes frightening, sometimes thrilling, and that it made him feel seen in a way he had never experienced before. Laura listened, calm and patient, the way she always did, giving him the space to express what he felt without interruption, and that patience gave him courage. He admitted that he didn't know exactly what the future would look like, that life had taught him to be careful with hope, but that he also knew he didn't want to face it alone, didn't want to keep moving through life without the possibility of partnership, of companionship, of love shared with someone who understood and chose him deliberately. As he looked into her eyes, he saw a reflection of his own vulnerability, and the unspoken promise that she had been offering all along, that this was not a question asked lightly, that she had already invested in understanding him, in trusting him, in imagining what a life together could be. Ethan finally spoke the words that had been forming in his mind for weeks, words that carried both fear and determination. Yes. I would consider being your husband. The simplicity of the phrase belied the depth of emotion behind it, the years of longing, of hope tempered by disappointment, the careful consideration of someone who had finally found a heart brave enough to ask and gentle enough to wait for an answer. Laura smiled softly, not a dramatic or exaggerated expression, but one full of quiet relief and joy, reaching across the table to take his hand, a gesture both intimate and grounding, confirming that they were stepping forward together, that the choice to explore life side by side had been made, deliberate and mutual. That night, they talked about what that choice might mean, not in terms of rigid plans or distant promises, but in terms of shared values, understanding each other's needs, and building a life where communication and honesty would be the foundation, where mistakes would be met with patience and empathy, and where love would grow steadily rather than be rushed or forced. Outside, the city lights glimmered, reflecting in the windows of her apartment, unaware that two hearts, once cautious and hesitant, had found courage and clarity in each other, and Ethan realized that love often begins quietly, not with fireworks or grand gestures, but with questions asked in moments of sincerity, with vulnerability accepted and met with equal honesty, and with the willingness to take small, deliberate steps together. Over the following days and weeks, their bond strengthened through ordinary yet meaningful acts, walks through the city, quiet conversations over coffee, shared meals, moments of laughter, and even comfortable silences that spoke of trust and familiarity, each encounter reinforcing their decision, making the possibility of a shared future feel real and attainable. And each step forward deepened Ethan's understanding that choosing each other was not about perfection, but about mutual respect, understanding, and the courage to imagine happiness together. By the time the first hints of winter touched the city, Ethan and Laura had established a rhythm of life that felt both natural and exciting, filled with small rituals of connection, from texting thoughtful notes during the day to meeting for evening walks by the river. And Ethan marveled at how quickly their relationship had grown without the need for dramatic declarations, proving to him that love, when founded on sincerity and mutual choice, could develop powerfully and beautifully. He found himself thinking not about the past rejections or the loneliness that had once defined his nights, but about the present and the future, feeling gratitude that life had guided him to this moment, to a woman who saw him fully and who had the courage to ask the question that changed everything: would he consider being her husband? And in that realization, Ethan understood that life sometimes offers rare opportunities disguised as ordinary encounters, that courage and honesty are often rewarded in ways we cannot predict, and that the quiet, steady unfolding of love, when nurtured with care, patience, and genuine choice, could lead to a partnership strong enough to weather life's uncertainties, a partnership that began with a simple question, a sincere answer, and the mutual decision to walk forward together, step by step. Heart to heart.